If you follow British politics, you will have heard the words 1922 committee used quite often. The 1922 committee is today an 18-person group which is elected by all members of Parliament of the Conservative Party, except for those that are in government. That is to say, all of the members of Parliament who are on the back benches. The name comes from the year 1922. During World War I, a coalition government was formed whereby David Lloyd George, who ran the National Liberal Party, went into an alliance with the Conservative and Labour parties in 1916. On the 19th of October 1922, 286 Conservative Party members of Parliament met at the Carlton Club in London, and they voted to leave the coalition, thus triggering a general election. It needs to be pointed out that at the time both the Conservative and Liberal parties were split, with members both in and out of the coalition. Reasons for the meeting included a political scandal involving the sale of honours, a tradition that continues to this day, and over matters relating to foreign policy. A general election was held which saw gains for the Labour and Liberal Party at the expense of the Conservative Party and David Lloyd George's National Liberals. Despite losing 35 seats, the 344 seats won by the Conservatives were enough to bring them to power, led by Bonar Law on the 15th of November 1922. The 1922 committee thus refers to the intake of Conservative MPs from the 1922 election, and not, as I just heard from watching a parliamentary speech on the internet, the Carlton Club meeting of the 19th of October 1922. Initially, the 1922 committee was a dining club of a small group of these MPs from the 1922 intake, but over the subsequent years it grew. In 1926, all backbench members of Parliament from the Conservative Party were invited to become members. So in theory, it represents the feelings of backbench members of Parliament. Today, it is capable of forcing a vote of no confidence in a Conservative Party leader, as it did most recently with Boris Johnson, although in his case, the vote was not successful in forcing the Prime Minister to leave. If I may now make a political point which I think is highly relevant to the state of the Conservative Party today. The Prime Minister, Bonar Law, fell ill with cancer and resigned on the 22nd of May 1923 after just over 6 months in office. He was replaced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Stanley Baldwin. The Conservative Party had won the 15th of November 1922 general election, which gave it a strong majority. It held 344 seats of 615 seats in Parliament. However, it seems as though Stanley Baldwin felt that he needed to have a mandate from the electorate, who had not voted for him personally and previously as Prime Minister, and because he wanted to introduce tariff reform and an imperial preference as protectionist trade policies over the objections of the free trades of the Conservative Party. In this way, you can see that the split in the Conservative Party over Europe goes much deeper. Long before anyone had thought of a European trading bloc, the Conservative Party was split over the question of access or non-access to markets. A further point, which is highly relevant today, is that whereas Bonar Law was dying of cancer at the time of his resignation, indeed he died on the 30th of October 1923, and Stanley Baldwin stepped into his shoes, a general election was still held. As far as that's concerned, I think you can jump to your own conclusions. As it happened, in 1923, there was a general election. The Conservative Party lost seats, but it was still the largest party in Parliament. Nonetheless, the Labour and Liberal parties together were able to form a coalition, and they went into government. This was the first ever Labour government. That is, of course, a story for another time. So I hope you found that interesting. I did say a couple of days ago that I wasn't going to do much more in British politics, but this actually jumped out of the computer at me whilst I was listening to this parliamentary debate on whether or not to get rid of Liz Truss. And the speaker referred to the Carlton Club meeting of the 19th of October 1922. So I just felt I have to make the point on this one, particularly as I think that not many people realise what this is all about. Having said that, I normally do things related to 20th century history, which this of course is, but relating above all to Nazi Germany and the communist Soviet Union, and recently, of course, the war in Ukraine, and comparing that to previous conflicts. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, then please do subscribe. Having said that, whenever I see something that has relevance in the past to what is happening today, I'll make the point. I think we can say those who don't learn from history need to relive it again, or something like that. The role of the historian, to a certain extent, is to point out the mistakes from the past so that they don't reoccur. But as we see, most people fail to make the correlation between what happened once and what's happening today. Thanks very much for listening. Anyway, all the best from me in Wrocław, Poland.